The gymnasium of Lincoln High School buzzed with the familiar energy of a 20-year reunion, but beneath the surface of forced smiles and champagne glasses, old wounds were about to be reopened. Rebecca Martinez stood at the entrance, her simple black dress and understated jewelry making her nearly invisible among the designer gowns and flashy accessories that adorned her former classmates. What none of them knew was that in exactly 3 hours, a military helicopter would land on the school's football field, and everything they thought they knew about, quiet, unremarkable Rebecca, would shatter like glass. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her modest silver watch, the same one she'd worn throughout her military service, though none of her classmates would recognize its significance. The Lincoln High School class of 2004 had gathered for their milestone reunion, and walking through those familiar doors felt like stepping back into a time capsule she'd rather leave sealed. The decorations committee had done their best to transform the old gymnasium into something resembling elegance. Twinkling lights draped from the basketball hoops, round tables covered in white linens dotted the polished floor, and a makeshift bar had been set up near the trophy case that still displayed their senior year achievements. The DJ played a mix of early 2000s hits that immediately transported everyone back to their teenage years that Rebecca remembered very differently than most. Rebecca Martinez? The voice belonged to Stephanie Chen, former head cheerleader and current real estate mogul, if her LinkedIn posts were to be believed. She approached with that same perfectly practiced smile that had intimidated so many students 2 decades ago. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look exactly the same." The backhanded compliment landed with surgical precision. While Stephanie had clearly invested heavily in maintaining her appearance, professional highlights, designer dress, and enough jewelry to fund a small military operation, Rebecca's appearance remained refreshingly authentic. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal, and her dress was something she'd picked up at a department store during a rare shopping trip. "Hello, Stephanie?" "You look wonderful," Rebecca replied with genuine warmth, though she caught the slight eye roll that Stephanie exchanged with her approaching companions. Madison Wells and Jennifer Rodriguez joined the circle, both perfectly coiffed and radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having their worldview challenged. Madison owned a successful marketing firm in downtown Portland, while Jennifer had married into old money and spent her days organizing charity galas that were more about social climbing than actual charity. "So, Rebecca," Madison began, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for addressing someone perceived as inferior, "what have you been up to all these years? We never see you on social media. Are you still living in that tiny apartment near the community college?" Rebecca had indeed lived in that apartment during her first year of college, before the military had become her calling. But she saw no need to correct the assumption or explain that her current residence was actually a comfortable home on a military base, earned through years of dedicated service and numerous promotions. "I've been keeping busy," Rebecca answered diplomatically. "Work keeps me traveling quite a bit." "Oh, what kind of work?" Jennifer asked, though her expression suggested she was already preparing to look down on whatever answer came next. "I work for the government," Rebecca said simply. The 3 women exchanged glances that were impossible to miss. In their minds, working for the government meant filing papers at the DMV or answering phones at the unemployment office. They had no framework for understanding that government work could encompass anything from diplomatic missions to counterterrorism operations. "That's nice," Stephanie said with thinly veiled condescension. "I'm sure it's very stable. Benefits are probably good too." Rebecca nodded, thinking of the commendations in her office, the lives she'd helped save, the strategic operations she'd planned and executed across 3 different continents. Stability was certainly one way to describe a career that had taken her from the mountains of Afghanistan to the training facilities of Fort Bragg. "Rebecca Martinez!" Another voice joined the conversation, this one belonging to Tyler Hammond, former quarterback and current insurance salesman, who had never quite accepted that his glory days were behind him. "Man, I haven't seen you since graduation. You just disappeared after high school." I went to college, Rebecca replied, though she didn't mention that college had been followed by officer candidate school, airborne training, and a series of deployments that had shaped her into someone completely unrecognizable from the quiet teenager they remembered. Right, community college, wasn't it? Tyler's assumption was wrong, but Rebecca had learned long ago that correcting people's misconceptions often caused more problems than it solved. Something like that, she agreed, taking a sip of her sparkling water while Tyler launched into a detailed account of his recent sales achievements and his new boat purchase. The conversation continued to flow around her, with former classmates sharing updates about their careers, marriages, and children. There was nothing inherently wrong with their life choices. Successful careers, loving families, and comfortable suburban existences were admirable achievements. But the underlying assumption that Rebecca had somehow failed to measure up because she didn't fit their narrow definition of success was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. You know, Rebecca, Madison said during a lull in the conversation, it's never too late to make something of yourself. My company is always looking for entry-level administrative assistants. The pay isn't great, but it's a foot in the door. The offer was delivered with such patronizing kindness that Rebecca almost laughed. Madison had no idea that Rebecca's current salary exceeded what most of these successful business people earned, or that her security clearance alone made her more valuable to certain employers than an entire marketing department. That's very thoughtful of you, Rebecca replied graciously. I'll keep that in mind. As the evening progressed, the pattern repeated itself with different groups of classmates. Each conversation followed a similar trajectory. Surprise at seeing her, thinly veiled inquiries about her perceived failures, and well-meaning but condescending offers of help or advice. Rebecca found herself relegated to the role of cautionary tale, the bright student who had somehow failed to live up to her potential. The reunion committee had organized various activities throughout the evening. There was a slideshow of senior year photos that brought back memories of a time when Rebecca had been largely invisible to her more popular classmates. A memorial table honored the 3 classmates who had passed away, including Brian Murphy, who had died in a car accident just 2 years after graduation. Rebecca stood quietly at the memorial table, thinking about her own close calls with death, and how different her perspective on mortality had become. During dinner, Rebecca found herself seated at a table with other classmates who had been considered average or unremarkable during their high school years. The conversation was more genuine here, with people sharing real struggles and honest achievements rather than the carefully curated success stories that dominated other tables. Sarah Kim, who had been Rebecca's lab partner in chemistry, was now a nurse practitioner who had worked tirelessly during the pandemic. Michael Torres had built a successful construction company from nothing, employing dozens of people in their hometown. These were the kinds of achievements that Rebecca truly respected. People who had built meaningful lives through hard work and dedication. But even at this table, Rebecca felt the weight of unspoken questions. Her vague answers about her work and lack of social media presence had created an air of mystery that some interpreted as evasiveness. She could see the curiosity in their eyes, the polite concern for someone who seemed to have simply vanished from the conventional markers of success. The evening's entertainment included a DJ who played all the hits from their teenage years, and Rebecca watched as couples took to the dance floor, many of them still married to their high school sweethearts. She thought about her own romantic history, relationships that had been complicated by deployments, security clearances, and the simple fact that her work couldn't be easily explained to civilian partners. As the night wore on, the alcohol flowed more freely, and inhibitions lowered. The subtle condescension of earlier conversations gave way to more direct comments about Rebecca's perceived lack of achievement. Some classmates began sharing their theories about what had happened to her. Everything from a nervous breakdown, to a secret addiction, to simply giving up on life. I always thought she'd be the one to make it big, confided Ashley Parker to her circle of friends, loud enough for Rebecca to overhear. She was so smart in school. It's sad when people just don't live up to their potential. Rebecca excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment away from the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere. Standing in front of the mirror, she looked at her reflection and wondered what her former classmates would think if they knew the truth. Would they be impressed by her rank and achievements? Or would they find new ways to diminish her accomplishments? The restroom door opened, and Jennifer Rodriguez entered, clearly having had several drinks. "Rebecca, honey," she said with the exaggerated sympathy of someone who had never faced real hardship, "I just want you to know that we're all here for you. Whatever happened to derail your life, it's not too late to get back on track." "I appreciate your concern," Rebecca replied carefully, "but I'm quite content with my life." "Are you, though?" Jennifer pressed. "I mean, no husband, no kids, no real career? Don't you ever wonder what might have been if you'd made different choices?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with assumptions and judgment. Rebecca could have pointed out that Jennifer's perfect life was funded by a husband's family money, that her charity work was more about social status than genuine compassion, or that her children were being raised primarily by a series of nannies. Instead, she simply smiled and returned to the reunion. The evening was building toward something. Rebecca could feel it in the way conversations kept circling back to her perceived failures, in the increasingly bold comments about her life choices, and in the growing sense among her classmates that they were in the presence of someone who had somehow fallen from grace. What they didn't know was that outside, a military helicopter was already being prepared for a very special landing, and Rebecca's phone was about to ring with a call that would change everything. The reunion was about to become far more memorable than anyone had planned. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The reunion had reached that pivotal moment where alcohol loosened tongues and old high school hierarchies reasserted themselves with renewed vigor. Rebecca found herself increasingly isolated as groups of former classmates huddled together, their conversations punctuated by glances in her direction and poorly concealed whispers. The award ceremony had begun, with the reunion committee presenting tongue-in-cheek superlatives to various graduates. Most likely to still live in Mom's basement went to Derek Phillips, who actually owned a thriving tech startup but had maintained his love for vintage comic books. Biggest glow-up was awarded to Marcus Wright, who had transformed from an awkward teenager into a confident pediatric surgeon. The crowd laughed and applauded, everyone enjoying the light-hearted roasting of their former selves. But when committee chair Amanda Foster stepped up to the microphone with a mischievous grin, Rebecca felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. Amanda had been student council president, valedictorian, and the kind of person who genuinely believed she was helping when she was actually being cruel. "Now, our next award is a special one," Amanda announced, her voice carrying across the gymnasium with theatrical flair. "We have the Most Mysterious Disappearance Award, and I think we all know who this one goes to." Rebecca's table had gone silent. Even Sarah Kim and Michael Torres, who had been engaged in friendly conversation moments before, now looked uncomfortable as all eyes turned toward their quiet table-mate. "Rebecca Martinez," Amanda called out with false enthusiasm. "Come on up here, girl. We want to hear what you've been up to for the past 20 years. The applause was scattered and awkward, with most people unsure whether they were witnessing good-natured fun or something more cruel. Rebecca stood slowly, her military training kicking in as she maintained perfect posture despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She walked to the front of the room with measured steps, her face betraying nothing of the emotion swirling beneath the surface. "So Rebecca," Amanda continued, holding the joke award, a cheap plastic trophy with a question mark glued to the top. "Inquiring minds want to know. What's the big secret? Are you a spy, a witness protection program, or did you just give up on life after high school?" The question was delivered with a laugh, but the underlying cruelty was unmistakable. Rebecca stood at the microphone, looking out at the faces of people she had once considered friends, classmates who had shared 4 years of her life but had never really known her at all. "I've been working," Rebecca said simply, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Working where?" pressed Jason Butler, who had been the class clown and apparently still craved attention. "Come on, we're all friends here, no judgment." The lie was so obvious that several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca could see Stephanie Chen whispering to Madison Wells, both of them clearly enjoying the spectacle of their former classmates' public humiliation. "I work for the Department of Defense," Rebecca said, choosing her words carefully. "Ooh, the Department of Defense," mocked Tyler Hammond from his table near the front. "That sounds very official. What do you do there? File paperwork? Answer phones?" The laughter that followed was cruel and knowing. These people had already decided who Rebecca was. A failure, a disappointment, someone who had squandered whatever potential she might have had. The truth was irrelevant. They had constructed a narrative that made them feel better about their own choices and achievements. "I manage logistics," Rebecca replied, which was technically true if you considered coordinating multi-million-dollar military operations and overseeing the deployment of specialized units to be logistics management. "Logistics," repeated Jennifer Rodriguez with barely concealed disdain. "So you're basically a secretary." The comment drew more laughter, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her. She had faced down enemy combatants, made life-or-death decisions under pressure, and earned the respect of some of the most decorated military officers in the country. But standing here, in front of these people who had never left their comfortable suburban bubble, she felt like that insecure teenager again. "Something like that," Rebecca agreed, accepting the ridiculous trophy with grace she didn't feel. As she returned to her seat, the whispers followed her. The award ceremony continued, but Rebecca was no longer paying attention. She was thinking about the last time she had felt this small, this diminished. It had been during her first week of officer candidate school, when a drill instructor had tried to break her spirit by questioning whether she had what it took to lead soldiers into combat. The difference was that the drill instructor had been testing her, pushing her to find the strength she didn't know she possessed. These people were simply being cruel for the sake of cruelty, tearing down someone they perceived as weak to make themselves feel superior. "You handled that well," whispered Sarah Kim, reaching over to squeeze Rebecca's hand. "They're being awful." Rebecca appreciated the support, but she could see the pity in Sarah's eyes. Even her defenders assumed she was a victim, someone who needed protection from the harsh realities of life. None of them could conceive that she might be anything other than what she appeared to be. The evening's entertainment continued with a talent show featuring classmates who had maintained their artistic hobbies. Lisa Chen played piano with surprising skill, while Robert Martinez, no relation to Rebecca, performed a comedy routine that was actually quite funny. The mood in the room shifted back toward celebration, but Rebecca remained an outsider, marked by her earlier humiliation. During the talent show, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it discreetly, noting the sender, Colonel Patricia Hayes, her direct superior, and one of the most respected officers in the Special Operations Command. The message was brief but significant. "Package delivery confirmed for 2,200 hours. Recommend position yourself accordingly." Rebecca checked her watch, 9:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes to prepare for a moment that would change everything. But first, she had to endure whatever fresh humiliation her classmates had planned for the remainder of the evening. The reunion committee had saved their cruelest surprise for last. As the talent show concluded, Amanda Foster returned to the microphone with barely contained excitement. "Before we wrap up this amazing evening," she announced, "we have one more special presentation. Our reunion committee has been working hard to track down everyone from our graduating class, and we've put together a little presentation about where everyone is now." The lights dimmed and a projector screen descended from the ceiling. What followed was a carefully curated slideshow of success stories: wedding photos, graduation ceremonies, business achievements, and family portraits. Each slide was accompanied by detailed descriptions of accomplishments, career highlights, and personal milestones. Rebecca watched as her classmates' adult lives played out on the screen in glossy, social media-perfect images. Stephanie Chen's real estate empire, complete with photos of her receiving industry awards. Madison Wells' marketing firm, showcased through pictures of her giving presentations to Fortune 500 companies. Jennifer Rodriguez's charity work, documented through photos of her shaking hands with local politicians and celebrities. Then came the slide that Rebecca had been dreading. Her senior year portrait appeared on the screen, But instead of the accomplished adult photos that had accompanied every other presentation, there was simply a large question mark and the text, Rebecca Martinez, status unknown. The room erupted in nervous laughter. Some people were clearly uncomfortable with the display, but others seemed to find it hilarious. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. As you can see, Amanda continued with false sympathy, we couldn't find much information about our dear Rebecca. No LinkedIn profile, no Facebook updates, no wedding announcements in the local paper. It's like she just vanished into thin air after graduation. The slide lingered on the screen longer than necessary, driving home the point that Rebecca was the only member of their class who had failed to achieve anything worth documenting. In a room full of successful adults, she was being presented as a cautionary tale, the smart kid who had somehow lost her way. But that's okay, Amanda added with patronizing kindness. We're all here tonight, and that's what matters. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, and that's perfectly normal. The applause that followed was scattered and uncomfortable, with most people unsure how to respond to such a blatant display of cruelty disguised as inclusivity. Rebecca sat through it all with military bearing, her face impassive, even as her former classmates' judgment washed over her like a tide. As the slideshow ended and the lights came back up, Rebecca excused herself from her table. She needed air, space to process what had just happened and prepare for what was about to occur. Walking through the gymnasium doors, she stepped into the cool night air and took her first deep breath in hours. The school's football field stretched out before her, empty except for the goalposts that had witnessed countless Friday night games during their teenage years. In the distance, she could see the approach lights of the municipal airport, where a very special aircraft was making its final preparations for an arrival that would rewrite everything her classmates thought they knew about quiet, unremarkable Rebecca Martinez. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Colonel Hayes. Martinez, Rebecca answered, her voice automatically shifting to the crisp, professional tone she used in military communications. Major General, came the familiar voice of her superior. We're 5 minutes out. Are you ready for this? Rebecca looked back at the gymnasium, where her former classmates continued their celebration, blissfully unaware that their evening was about to take a dramatic turn. In less than 5 minutes, everything would change, and the woman they had dismissed as a failure would be revealed as one of the most decorated military officers of her generation. I'm ready, Colonel, Rebecca replied, straightening her shoulders and preparing for the moment that would transform her from victim to victor in the most spectacular way possible. The distant rumble began as nothing more than a whisper in the night sky, easily dismissed as traffic from the nearby interstate. Rebecca stood on the concrete steps of Lincoln High School, her phone still pressed to her ear as Colonel Hayes provided final coordination details for what was about to become the most memorable moment in the school's history. ETA 2 minutes, Major General, the colonel reported with military precision. The advance team has cleared the landing zone, and local air traffic control has been notified. We have priority clearance for the entire operation. Through the gymnasium windows, Rebecca could see her former classmates still mingling, their laughter and conversation creating a backdrop of normalcy that was about to be shattered. The reunion committee had moved on to organizing group photos, with Amanda Foster directing people into various configurations while maintaining her role as the evening's self-appointed master of ceremonies. Copy that, Colonel, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of commanding respect in the most dangerous situations imaginable. I'll be in position. The rumble grew louder, and a few people near the windows began to look up curiously. Rebecca ended the call and smoothed her simple black dress, checking her reflection in the glass doors one final time. In moments, she would transform from the object of pity into something these people had never imagined possible. Inside the gymnasium, the first person to notice the approaching aircraft was Kevin Sullivan, who had been stepping outside for a cigarette when the unmistakable sound of rotor blades began cutting through the night air. He stubbed out his cigarette and peered into the darkness, trying to locate the source of the noise. Is that a helicopter? He called back to his wife Patricia, who was still inside organizing their table's contribution to the memory book. The question rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Conversations paused mid-sentence as people strained to listen. The sound was definitely getting closer, and it was definitely military. The deep, powerful thrumming that came from serious aircraft designed for serious purposes. Why would there be a helicopter here, wondered Lisa Chen, pressing her face against the windows, along with a growing crowd of curious classmates. Do you think something's wrong? The gymnasium began to empty as people moved outside to get a better view. Rebecca remained on the steps, watching her former classmates emerge in clusters, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and concern. Some were already pulling out their phones to record whatever was about to happen. Amanda Foster appeared at the doorway, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled from the rush to see what was causing the commotion. "Does anyone know what's going on?" she demanded, as if the very presence of military aircraft was somehow disrupting her carefully planned evening. The helicopter came into view over the tree line, its navigation lights blinking against the star-filled sky. It was an impressive sight. A UH-60 Blackhawk painted in the dark colors of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, its sleek profile unmistakable even to civilian eyes. The aircraft banked gracefully toward the football field, its powerful rotors creating a downdraft that sent leaves and debris swirling through the parking lot. "That's a military helicopter," announced Jason Butler, who had served briefly in the National Guard before a knee injury ended his service. "That's not just any helicopter. That's special operations equipment." The crowd of former classmates pressed closer to the chain-link fence that separated the school grounds from the football field. Rebecca remained on the steps, her position giving her a clear view of both the landing zone and the growing crowd of spectators. The Black Hawk touched down with professional precision, its pilots executing a textbook landing in the center of the football field. The aircraft's engines remained running, but it reduced power, creating a steady background hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. For a moment, nothing happened. The helicopter sat silent except for the turning rotors, its crew invisible behind tinted windows. Then, with military precision, several figures emerged from the aircraft. The first to exit was Colonel Patricia Hayes, a woman in her 50s whose bearing commanded immediate respect. She was followed by 3 other officers, each wearing dress uniforms, adorned with ribbons and decorations that spoke of distinguished service and significant achievements. "What the hell is this about?" muttered Tyler Hammond, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine confusion. "Why are they here?" The answer came as the military delegation began walking across the football field toward the school, their formation tight and purposeful. They weren't tourists or lost travelers. They were here for a specific reason, and their destination was clearly Lincoln High School. Stephanie Chen had pushed her way to the front of the crowd, her real estate agent instincts kicking in as she tried to process what was happening. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "They're probably looking for someone else." The military officers reached the fence and paused, with Colonel Hayes stepping forward to address the crowd that had gathered. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her words cutting through the murmur of confused conversations, "we're here on official business. We need to speak with Major General Rebecca Martinez." The silence that followed was absolute. Every head turned toward Rebecca, who remained standing on the school steps with the same calm composure she had maintained throughout the evening's earlier humiliations. But now, instead of pity or condescension, the faces looking at her showed shock, disbelief, and the beginning of understanding. "Major General?" whispered Sarah Kim, her voice barely audible above the helicopter's idling engines. "Rebecca is a Major General?" Amanda Foster's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about their former classmate. The woman they had been mocking all evening, the one they had given a joke award to, the one whose accomplishments they couldn't find, was apparently one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States military. Rebecca walked down the steps with measured grace, approaching the fence where Colonel Hayes waited. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path for her passage. With each step, the transformation became more apparent. This wasn't the defeated woman who had accepted their ridicule earlier. This was someone who commanded respect on an international level. "Colonel Hayes," Rebecca said as she reached the fence, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned crowd. "I wasn't expecting you tonight. My apologies for the interruption, Major General, Colonel Hayes replied with a slight smile. But we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. The Secretary of Defense has requested your presence for an emergency briefing regarding the operation in Eastern Europe. The words hit the crowd like physical blows. Secretary of Defense. Emergency briefing, Eastern Europe. These weren't the career markers of a failed government clerk or a disappointed secretary. These were the responsibilities of someone operating at the highest levels of national security. Of course, Rebecca replied without hesitation. Do I have time to change into a uniform? We have a fresh uniform waiting for you on the aircraft, Major General. The situation is time-sensitive. Jennifer Rodriguez had gone pale, her champagne glass forgotten in her trembling hand. This can't be real, she whispered to Madison Wells, who was staring at Rebecca with an expression of complete bewilderment. But she said she worked in logistics, Madison replied weakly, clinging to the explanation Rebecca had given earlier in the evening. Jason Butler, who had some military background, began to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Logistics for a major general, he said slowly, means coordinating military operations across multiple theaters. She's not filing paperwork, she's planning wars. The revelation rippled through the crowd as people began to grasp the implications. Rebecca's vague answers about traveling for work took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of international military operations. Her lack of social media presence made perfect sense for someone with high-level security clearance. Her modest lifestyle wasn't the result of limited means. It was the disciplined approach of someone whose real wealth lay in achievement and honor rather than material possessions. This is impossible, Stephanie Chen said, though her voice lacked conviction. We went to school with her. She was nobody special. But even as she spoke, memories were surfacing that contradicted her dismissive assessment. Rebecca had been valedictorian material before choosing not to compete for the honor. She had excelled in leadership roles when she chose to participate. She had possessed a quiet confidence that they had mistaken for passivity. Colonel Hayes opened the gate and entered the school grounds, followed by her fellow officers. They approached Rebecca with the kind of respect reserved for senior military officials, their body language speaking volumes about her actual status within the command structure. Major General Martinez, Colonel Hayes continued, I should mention that the Joint Chiefs have been following your recommendations regarding the strategic realignment. The chairman specifically requested your input on the next phase of operations. The Joint Chiefs of Staff. These were names that appeared in international headlines. Leaders whose decisions affected global politics. And Rebecca Martinez, quiet, invisible Rebecca whom they had pitied and mocked, was apparently consulting with them on matters of national importance. I'll need to review the latest intelligence reports during the flight, Rebecca replied, her transformation from reunion attendee to military commander now complete. Has the president been briefed on our assessment? The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. The president, their former classmate, the woman they had dismissed as a failure, was discussing briefings with the President of the United States. Derek Phillips, who had been filming the encounter on his phone, slowly lowered the device. We made fun of her, he said quietly, his voice filled with growing horror. We gave her a joke award. We called her a failure. The weight of their collective cruelty was beginning to settle on the crowd like a heavy blanket. They had spent the evening tearing down someone whose actual achievements dwarfed their own accomplishments so completely that comparison was almost meaningless. Rebecca turned to address the crowd one final time before departing. Her voice was calm and professional, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there earlier. A quiet strength that came from knowing her worth regardless of others' opinions. I apologize for the disruption to your evening, she said to the stunned faces before her. I hope you can continue to enjoy the reunion. There was no anger in her voice, no satisfaction at their obvious shock and embarrassment. She was simply a professional responding to duty's call, treating her former classmates with the same courtesy she would extend to any group of citizens whose evening had been interrupted by military business. As Rebecca turned to leave with the military delegation, the full scope of the evening's reversal became clear to everyone present. The woman they had dismissed, humiliated, and pitied was walking away to consult with the highest levels of government on matters that would affect millions of lives. Their successful careers and comfortable lives suddenly seemed very small in comparison to the weight of responsibility she carried on her shoulders. The military delegation escorted Rebecca toward the helicopter, their formation precise and respectful. But before they reached the aircraft, Colonel Hayes paused and turned back toward the stunned crowd of classmates still pressed against the fence. "If I may," the colonel announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to addressing large groups, "I'd like to share something with you about Major General Martinez, since you're her former classmates." Rebecca stopped walking, a slight tension visible in her shoulders. She hadn't expected this moment, and the prospect of having her achievements publicly discussed felt more daunting than any military operation she had commanded. "Colonel, that's not necessary," Rebecca said quietly, but Hayes raised a respectful hand. "With your permission, Major General, I think these people should understand exactly who they've been sharing their evening with." The crowd had grown larger as word spread throughout the school. Teachers who had been cleaning up in other areas emerged to witness the unprecedented scene. Even some family members who had been waiting in cars came forward, drawn by the commotion and the unmistakable sight of a military helicopter on their old football field. Rebecca nodded reluctantly, understanding that this moment was bigger than her personal comfort. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, addressing the crowd with the bearing of someone delivering an important briefing. "Major General Rebecca Martinez graduated from West Point with highest honors before most of you had finished your bachelor's degrees. She completed Ranger School, Airborne School, and Special Operations training before her 25th birthday. In her 20-year military career, she has served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and classified operations across 3 continents." The words fell on the crowd like individual hammer blows. Each achievement was a stark reminder of how completely they had misjudged their former classmate. Amanda Foster's perfectly manicured hand covered her mouth as the full scope of her evening's cruelty became apparent. "She has received the Bronze Star with V Device for Valor, the Purple Heart for wounds received in combat, the Distinguished Service Medal, and the Legion of Merit. She speaks 6 languages fluently and holds advanced degrees from both Harvard's Kennedy School and the National War College." Sarah Kim was openly crying now, overwhelmed by the realization that someone she had pitied was actually one of the most accomplished members of their graduating class. Michael Torres shook his head in disbelief, thinking about his own pride in building a successful construction company while Rebecca had been rebuilding entire nations. "Most recently," Colonel Hayes continued, "Major General Martinez planned and executed Operation Guardian Shield, which successfully evacuated over 12,000 civilians from hostile territory with 0 casualties. The president personally commended her for that mission." The silence was deafening. Even the helicopter's engines seemed muted compared to the weight of these revelations. Tyler Hammond, who had mocked Rebecca's government work earlier, was staring at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "She has trained foreign military leaders, advised NATO commanders, and currently oversees counterterrorism operations for the entire European theater. When international crises emerge, Major General Martinez is often among the first people the Pentagon calls." Jennifer Rodriguez was gripping Madison Wells' arms so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The woman they had offered entry-level administrative positions to was operating at levels of responsibility they couldn't even comprehend. Their successful suburban careers suddenly seemed incredibly provincial in comparison. "What makes her truly exceptional," Colonel Hayes concluded, "is not just her military achievements but her character. Despite everything she has accomplished, she remains humble, dedicated, and completely focused on serving others rather than serving herself." The colonel's words hung in the air as Rebecca stood silently beside her, neither proud nor embarrassed, simply accepting the recognition with the same grace she had shown throughout the evening's earlier humiliations. Her classmates were seeing her clearly for the first time, and the contrast with their own behavior was stark and uncomfortable. "Now, if you'll excuse us," Colonel Hayes said, "we have a situation that requires the Major General's immediate attention. National security doesn't pause for social events." As the delegation resumed walking toward the helicopter, something extraordinary happened. Derek Phillips, who had been among the most vocal mockers earlier in the evening, stepped forward and called out, "Major General Martinez, wait!" Rebecca turned, her expression neutral but not unkind. Derek approached the fence, his phone still in his hand but no longer recording. His voice shook as he spoke. "I want to apologize. We all want to apologize. We were horrible to you tonight. We had no idea who you really are." "You knew exactly who I was," Rebecca replied calmly. "I'm the same person I was in high school. The only difference is that you now know more about what I chose to do with my life." Her words were delivered without malice, but they cut deep. The truth was that Rebecca hadn't fundamentally changed. They had simply revealed their own character through their treatment of someone they perceived as unsuccessful. Stephanie Chen pushed forward, her earlier confidence completely shattered. "We're sorry, we're so sorry, the things we said, the way we treated you. You treated me the way you thought someone deserved to be treated based on your assumptions about their worth," Rebecca said. "That says more about you than it does about me." The observation was clinical and devastating. These successful adults were being forced to confront the fact that their accomplishments hadn't made them better people. In many cases, they had made them worse. Amanda Foster, who had orchestrated much of the evening's cruelty, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "The award, the slideshow, everything we did, how can you ever forgive us?" Rebecca looked at her former classmate for a long moment before responding. "I forgave you years ago, Amanda. I learned a long time ago that carrying anger is like carrying poison. It only hurts the person holding it." The wisdom in her words reflected decades of experience dealing with far more serious conflicts than high school reunion drama. She had commanded soldiers in life-or-death situations, negotiated with hostile foreign leaders, and made decisions that affected global stability. The petty cruelties of former classmates barely registered on her scale of significant problems. "But how do we make this right?" asked Jason Butler, his voice desperate with the need to somehow undo the evening's damage. "You don't," Rebecca replied simply. "You learn from it. You do better next time. You remember that everyone has a story you don't know, achievements you can't see, and struggles you haven't imagined." Lisa Chen, who had provided musical entertainment earlier, spoke up through her tears. "We wasted so much time being awful to you. We could have been celebrating someone truly extraordinary." "You were celebrating," Rebecca pointed out. "You were celebrating your own successes, your own lives, your own achievements. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem came when you decided that celebrating yourselves required diminishing someone else." Her analysis was so precise and fair that it left no room for argument. These people had spent the evening congratulating themselves while tearing down someone they perceived as unsuccessful. The revelation of Rebecca's true status didn't change the fundamental cruelty of their behavior. It only made it more obviously misguided. Colonel Hayes had been listening to this exchange with growing respect for her superior officer. Military leadership training emphasized the importance of character under pressure, but watching Rebecca handle this deeply personal situation with such grace reinforced why she had risen to such high rank. "Major General," the colonel said gently, "we really do need to depart. The situation is time-sensitive." Rebecca nodded and began to turn away, but Michael Torres called out one final question that captured what everyone was thinking. "Why didn't you ever tell us? Why didn't you correct our assumptions?" Rebecca paused at the gate, considering her answer carefully. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "Because I learned something important during my military service. You can't force people to respect you, and you shouldn't have to justify your worth to anyone. The people who matter will see your value regardless of your rank or title. The people who don't see it probably wouldn't recognize it even if you explained it to them." She looked around at the crowd of former classmates, many of whom were now crying openly. "Besides," she added with the slightest hint of a smile, "I was curious to see who you really were when you thought I couldn't affect your lives in any way. That tells you everything you need to know about someone's character." The brutal honesty of her observation left the crowd speechless. They had failed a test they didn't even know they were taking, revealing themselves to be exactly the kind of people who judge others based on superficial assessments rather than inherent worth. As Rebecca walked toward the helicopter with the military delegation, her former classmates watched in stunned silence. The woman they had dismissed was departing to handle matters of national importance, while they remained behind to contemplate the magnitude of their misjudgment. The helicopter's engines began to increase in pitch, preparing for departure. Rebecca climbed aboard with the practiced ease of someone who had traveled by military aircraft countless times. Through the aircraft's windows, her classmates could see her settling into her seat, already shifting into the mindset required for whatever crisis awaited her attention. The Black Hawk lifted off with the same precision it had displayed upon landing, its powerful rotors creating a downdraft that sent programs and napkins swirling across the football field. As the aircraft gained altitude and turned toward its destination, the navigation lights disappeared into the night sky, leaving behind a group of humbled adults who would never again make assumptions about someone's worth based on appearances. The reunion was effectively over. People began to drift away in small groups, their conversations muted and reflective. The gymnasium, which had been filled with laughter and celebration just an hour earlier, now felt hollow and false. Everyone was processing the same uncomfortable realization. They had revealed themselves to be smaller people than they had imagined, while someone they had dismissed had demonstrated a grace and character that none of them possessed. As cars began leaving the parking lot, Amanda Foster stood alone on the school steps, still holding the ridiculous plastic trophy she had given to Rebecca as a joke. In her hands, it felt heavier than any real award she had ever received, a tangible reminder of the cruelty she had inflicted on someone who deserved nothing but respect and admiration. The weeks following the reunion passed like a slow-motion earthquake, with aftershocks rippling through the lives of everyone who had witnessed Rebecca's departure. The story spread beyond their graduating class, becoming local legend, and eventually making its way onto social media platforms where it took on a life of its own. Derek Phillips had posted the video footage from his phone, though he'd carefully edited out the most cruel moments from earlier in the evening. Even so, the transformation from mockery to military honors was dramatic enough to capture widespread attention. The comments section became a battlefield of opinions about judgment, success, and the hidden depths of ordinary people. Amanda Foster found herself at the center of an uncomfortable spotlight she had never wanted. Local news stations picked up the story, and reporters began calling for interviews about the reunion that had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. She declined every request, but the damage to her reputation was immediate and severe. Her event planning business, which had thrived on word-of-mouth recommendations and social connections, began experiencing a sudden drought of new clients. The Lincoln High reunion had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of public humiliation, and nobody wanted to hire someone who had orchestrated such a spectacular display of cruelty. The irony wasn't lost on Amanda that her carefully curated image as a successful professional had been destroyed by her own actions. She spent sleepless nights replaying every moment of the evening, wondering how she had become someone capable of such calculated meanness. Stephanie Chen's real estate empire faced similar scrutiny. Several potential clients withdrew from negotiations after seeing the footage, citing concerns about her character and judgment. The luxury home market depended heavily on personal relationships and trust, and Stephanie's behavior at the reunion had shattered both. Her business partner, David Kim, called an emergency meeting 3 days after the reunion video went viral. "We need to address this situation immediately," he said, sliding a tablet across the conference table showing dozens of negative online reviews. "Our reputation is being destroyed by association with what happened that night." Stephanie stared at the screen, reading comment after comment condemning her behavior. The professional success she had worked so hard to build was crumbling because of one evening's poor choices. Worse, she was beginning to understand that the comments weren't unfair. She really had behaved terribly. Madison Wells faced professional consequences as well. Her marketing firm's largest client, a major corporation with military contracts, terminated their relationship after executives saw the reunion footage. The irony was devastating. They were canceling their contract specifically because Madison had mocked a decorated military officer. How were we supposed to know? Madison asked her husband during one of their increasingly frequent arguments about the situation. "She never told us what she did for a living." "That's exactly the point," her husband replied with exasperation that had been building for weeks. "You didn't know, but you decided to tear her down anyway. What does that say about who you are as a person?" The question haunted Madison because she didn't have a good answer. She had always considered herself a good person, successful and kind, But the reunion had revealed something uglier beneath her polished exterior. Jennifer Rodriguez's charity work came under similar scrutiny. Board members of the various organizations she supported began questioning whether someone who had displayed such cruelty toward a military veteran should represent their causes. 2 charities asked her to step down from leadership positions, citing concerns about public perception. The social circle that had once revolved around Jennifer's connections and influence began to fracture. Friends who had witnessed her behavior that night started declining invitations to her events, and the charity galas that had once been the highlight of Portland's social calendar became increasingly difficult to organize. Meanwhile, Tyler Hammond discovered that his insurance company had a specific policy about employees whose behavior reflected poorly on the organization. The reunion video had been shared in the office by a colleague who thought it was funny, but management saw it differently. Tyler found himself facing a formal review and mandatory sensitivity training. But perhaps the most profound changes occurred in people who had witnessed the events without participating in the cruelty. Sarah Kim, who had tried to defend Rebecca throughout the evening, became an advocate for veterans organizations in their community. She used her medical practice to provide free services to former military personnel, inspired by Rebecca's example of service. Michael Torres, the construction company owner, established a scholarship fund for children of military families, specifically aimed at helping them pursue higher education. He had been humbled by the realization that someone he had considered a peer was operating at levels of responsibility he couldn't even comprehend. Lisa Chen, the nurse practitioner who had worked during the pandemic, began volunteering with organizations that supported military families during deployments. The reunion had reminded her that service took many forms, and she wanted to honor that understanding through action. The ripple effects extended far beyond their immediate circle. The story had resonated with people across the country who had their own experiences with being underestimated, dismissed, or judged unfairly. Rebecca had unknowingly become a symbol of quiet dignity in the face of adversity. 6 months after the reunion, Amanda Foster received an unexpected phone call. The number wasn't familiar, but the voice belonged to Rebecca Martinez. "Hello, Amanda. I hope you're well." Amanda nearly dropped the phone. She had imagined this conversation countless times, rehearsing apologies and explanations. But now that the moment had arrived, words failed her completely. "Major General Martinez," she stammered. I don't know what to say." "Rebecca is fine," came the calm reply. "I'm calling because I wanted to check on you. I heard about some of the difficulties you've been experiencing." The kindness in Rebecca's voice was almost unbearable. After everything that had happened, after all the cruelty and humiliation Amanda had orchestrated, Rebecca was calling to express concern for her well-being. "I deserved it," Amanda said, tears already streaming down her face. "Everything that's happened to me, I deserved it. The way I treated you was unforgivable." "Nobody deserves to have their life destroyed over a single evening's mistakes," Rebecca replied gently. "We all have moments we're not proud of. The question is what we do with those moments." The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with Rebecca offering perspective that only someone who had faced real adversity could provide. She spoke about the importance of learning from failure, the value of genuine remorse, and the possibility of redemption through changed behavior. "I've seen people at their worst and at their best," Rebecca said near the end of their call. "Often, they're the same people on different days. What matters is the direction you choose to move from here." Similar conversations took place with other classmates over the following months. Rebecca reached out to each person who had participated in the evening's cruelty, not to shame them further, but to offer a path towards something better. It was a level of grace that few people could have managed, and it spoke to the character that had earned her such high rank in the military. Some people took her message to heart and made genuine changes in their lives. Stephanie Chen began volunteering with homeless veterans, using her real estate connections to help them find housing. Madison Wells redirected her marketing skills toward promoting veteran-owned businesses. Tyler Hammond started a support group for military families dealing with PTSD. Others struggled to move beyond their shame and embarrassment, remaining trapped in a cycle of self-recrimination that prevented real growth. The reunion had become a defining moment that revealed not just who people were, but who they were capable of becoming. A year later, Rebecca received an invitation to speak at Lincoln High School's graduation ceremony. The principal, who had heard about the reunion incident, wanted her to address the graduating class about service, character, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Standing at the podium where she had once been an invisible student, Rebecca looked out at faces full of possibility and potential. She spoke about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their apparent status or success. She talked about the difference between achievement and character, between recognition and worth. Success isn't measured by what others think of you, she told the graduates. It's measured by what you do when nobody is watching, how you treat people who can't help you, and whether you use your gifts to lift others up or tear them down. In the audience, several of her former classmates listened with tears in their eyes. They had learned these lessons the hard way, through the consequences of their own poor choices. But Rebecca's willingness to forgive and guide them toward better futures had shown them that redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work. The reunion had started as a celebration of past achievements and evolved into a powerful lesson about present character. Rebecca Martinez had walked into that gymnasium as the object of pity and walked out as an example of everything her classmates could aspire to become. Years later, when people talked about the Lincoln High School class of 2004 reunion, they didn't remember the decorations or the music or the awards ceremony. They remembered the night when a helicopter landed on a football field and taught an entire community about the danger of judging others and the power of grace under pressure. Rebecca's story became a reminder that the most extraordinary people often walk among us unrecognized, that true success is measured in service rather than status, and that how we treat others when we think it doesn't matter is actually when it matters most of all. The reunion had ended, but the lessons it taught continued to ripple outward, changing lives and perspectives in ways that no one could have anticipated when they first mocked the quiet woman in the simple black dress, who turned out to be one of the most remarkable people any of them would ever meet. 5 years after that transformative evening, Lincoln High School established the Rebecca Martinez Character Award, given annually to a graduating senior who demonstrated exceptional integrity, service, and humility. The award came with a full scholarship funded by anonymous donations from her former classmates, who had found their own paths to redemption. The first recipient was Maria Santos, a quiet student from a military family who had spent her high school years volunteering at the local VA hospital while maintaining perfect grades. During the awards ceremony, Rebecca returned once again to present the honor personally, though she insisted the focus remain on the student rather than herself. Character isn't built in moments of triumph, Rebecca told the assembled graduates and families. It's forged in how we respond to adversity, how we treat those who seem to have nothing to offer us, and whether we choose compassion over judgment when given the choice. The scholarship program had an unexpected impact on the school's culture. Students began paying closer attention to acts of kindness and service that might otherwise go unnoticed. Teachers reported a significant decrease in bullying incidents, as the annual award reminded everyone that true worth wasn't measured by popularity or perceived success. Amanda Foster had become one of the program's most dedicated supporters, though she preferred to remain anonymous in her contributions. Her event planning business had eventually recovered, but it now focused exclusively on charity fundraisers and community service events. The reunion had fundamentally changed her understanding of what constituted meaningful work. During one of her conversations with Rebecca, Amanda had asked the question that haunted many of their former classmates: how do we know we've really changed? How do we prove we're not the same people we were that night? Rebecca's answer had been characteristically wise. You don't prove it through grand gestures or public declarations. You prove it through 1,000 small choices when nobody is watching. You prove it by becoming the person you wish you had been 20 years ago. The impact extended beyond their immediate community. The reunion story had been featured in military publications as an example of how veterans often faced misunderstanding and assumptions in civilian life. Rebecca had reluctantly agreed to be interviewed, though she consistently redirected attention to the broader issues of veteran integration and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. One interview question had particularly resonated with audiences. What would you say to other veterans who face similar situations? Remember that your worth isn't determined by civilian recognition, Rebecca had replied. Your service speaks for itself, regardless of whether others understand or acknowledge it. Stay true to the values that guided your military service, and let your character be your greatest achievement. The response had generated thousands of letters from veterans sharing their own experiences of being underestimated or dismissed. Rebecca had personally answered as many as possible, creating an informal network of support that eventually grew into a nonprofit organization focused on veteran career transition and advocacy. Sarah Kim had taken a sabbatical from her medical practice to help establish the organization's health services division. The reunion had awakened something in her about the power of service and the importance of using one's skills for the greater good. Working alongside Rebecca had taught her that leadership wasn't about titles or recognition, it was about taking responsibility for making things better. The organization's success led to invitations for Rebecca to speak at military academies, corporate leadership conferences, and university commencements. Each speech carried the same core message about dignity, service, and the danger of making assumptions about others' worth. At West Point, where Rebecca had begun her own military journey, she addressed cadets about to graduate and enter active duty. You will encounter civilians who don't understand military service, she told them. Some will appreciate your sacrifice, others will be indifferent, and a few may even be hostile. Your response to that treatment will define your character more than any medal or commendation ever could. The story had also found its way into corporate training programs about unconscious bias and workplace culture. Human resources departments used it as a case study in how assumptions about colleagues could create toxic environments and missed opportunities for collaboration. One Fortune 500 company implemented what they called the Martinez Protocol, a policy requiring managers to reconsider their assumptions about employees who might be undervalued or overlooked. The program led to several significant promotions for workers whose contributions had been previously minimized. The ripple effects continued to expand in unexpected directions. High schools across the country began incorporating the reunion story into their anti-bullying curricula, using it to discuss the long-term consequences of treating others poorly. College admissions counselors reported that many applicants referenced the story in their essays about character and personal growth. Rebecca herself had been promoted to lieutenant general, though she remained characteristically modest about the achievement. When reporters asked about her continued rise through military ranks, she deflected attention to her team and the importance of collaborative leadership. Success in the military, like success in life, is rarely the product of individual effort, she explained during a Pentagon briefing that was later declassified. It comes from understanding that everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their rank, background, or how they appear on the surface. The 25th reunion of the Lincoln High School class of 2004 was scheduled for the following year, and the planning committee, now led by Sarah Kim and Michael Torres, had already reached out to Rebecca. This time, however, the invitation came with a very different tone. We want to honor you properly, Sarah had written in her letter, not because of your rank or achievements, but because you showed us what grace under pressure really looks like. You taught us that how we treat others is the true measure of who we are. Rebecca had agreed to attend, though she insisted on one condition. The focus should be on celebrating everyone's growth and contributions, not on relitigating the past. The reunion would be a celebration of how people could change, learn, and become better versions of themselves. As the date approached, former classmates from around the country began making plans to attend. Many wanted the chance to thank Rebecca personally, not just for her forgiveness, but for the example she had set in how to handle adversity with dignity. Others came hoping to show how they had applied the lessons learned from that transformative evening. The Lincoln High School class of 2004 had become something unique, a group of people forever connected not just by shared teenage experiences, but by a collective lesson in humility, growth, and the power of second chances. Their stories served as a reminder that the most important reunions aren't about celebrating past achievements, but about acknowledging how much we've learned and how far we've grown. Rebecca Martinez had entered that gymnasium as an object of pity and left as a teacher, though the lessons she taught extended far beyond anything covered in traditional classrooms. Her quiet dignity had sparked a transformation that continued to influence lives, communities, and organizations years after that helicopter disappeared into the night sky, proving that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected sources. The story had even reached international audiences when Rebecca was featured in a documentary about military leadership. Foreign military academies began studying her approach to handling civilian misconceptions, and NATO training programs incorporated discussions about veteran integration into civilian society. During a recent visit to Allied forces in Germany, Rebecca met with European military officers who had heard about the reunion incident. Their questions focused not on the humiliation she had endured, but on her response to it, how she had maintained professionalism and grace under personal attack. "In military operations, we prepare for enemy fire," one British colonel observed during the discussion. But civilian misunderstanding can be just as challenging to navigate with honor intact. Rebecca's approach had become a case study in emotional resilience and leadership under pressure. Military psychologists now referenced her example when training officers for the transition back to civilian life, emphasizing that true strength was demonstrated not through retaliation, but through maintaining one's values regardless of how others behaved. The final irony was perhaps the most profound. The classmates who had tried to diminish Rebecca's worth had inadvertently created a platform that amplified her influence far beyond anything she might have achieved through traditional military channels. Their attempt to make her small had made her larger than life, transforming a personal moment of cruelty into a global lesson about character, dignity, and the transformative power of grace under fire. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.